Hey everybody, Professor Smith here. I want to use this video as a time for us to talk a little bit about project number one. So there's going to be a bunch of videos in this series once a week. I'll be making a video discussing what point of the project I'd like us to be at and how to go about doing all that fun stuff. So today's is more of a general overview of the project and encouragement for how to get started. So, as you might be able to gather from the title of this, Understanding and Combating False and Fake Information, this is a project where I want us to take a deeper dive into one particular fake news story that has come up sometime in the recent past. It doesn't say it in the prompt, and I will allow it, but I'd prefer you to try to not pick something from, let's say, the 1980s or the 1940s. I'd like for you to try and pick something at least from 2000 and beyond, and maybe even more recent than that. So we're going to go over some of the options on the list in a little bit, but I just wanted to say you pretty much have free range of whatever story, fake news information that you choose to pick. If you do pick one that is not on the prompt, I do ask that you please run it by me in an email or in a call or during office hours. So you could just be sending me a link and explaining a little bit about why you've chosen what you've chosen. But feel free to do it your own way. Feel free to choose something political, not political, something along those lines. So before I get into reading the prompt with you and explaining what I mean line by line, I just wanted to go over what the purpose of this project is going to be for us. There are many reasons why we're doing this, but really the main thing is to start practicing our research skills and taking a deeper dive into one particular subject. You are going to pick one fake news story. You might, in this project, discuss a few in passing, or you might generalize and talk about misleading information in the modern age in a general sense. But for the most part of these 4 to 6 pages, you will be focusing on exploring in depth one particular story, one particular instance, one particular piece of misinformation that you've chosen, that you've come across. So again, firstly and foremost, it's really for us to develop our research skills, to look at something and then to go out and get secondary and third sources to check what we've initially read, to make sure that we're not just following one source to get a bit of information. This is why I'm asking you, again, we'll go over this in a little bit, but for multiple sources and not just to choose one fake news article and then write about it. So beyond that, I do want us to have an understanding of where fake news comes from, why people create it, and what they hope to get out of it. I want us to see a purpose or a point behind it, that it's not just something people do for the sake of trolling or for the sake of doing it, but that there is some sort of power or political some power or some politics at play that is deriving that information, whether it be whatever the case might be. So I want us to be aware that this stuff is going on. I would imagine it's hard to not know this stuff considering all news sources, and it's all over social media, the word fake news. I believe it was even like word or term of the year in 2016 or 2017 on like Webster's dictionary or something along those lines. So more so than just being able to be recognize that it's something that's around, I want us to be able to understand how to identify it, and I want us to try and develop skills on how to combat it in the future. If we're all finding these stories, and there's multiple ones, if it is something that is prevalent and rampant in our modern digital age, what do we as citizens, as individuals do? What can we do to combat this stuff? Or do we just accept it? Unfortunately, because of how easy it is to put information on the internet, whether it's a video on YouTube or a podcast that you're creating, or whether it's a website. For $5, you can make a website. Use Wix for $25, and even with no computer experience, you can create a website and pretty much say anything you'd like to say. So unfortunately, it's our responsibility to fight, to combat, to be smarter, to be better than, or else we will not really know what truth is. And it sounds like a bad thing, especially for shopping and especially for living in a democratic society where we vote and things along those lines. So by the end of this, I really want you to be able to not just say, hey, here's one fake news article, but to say, hey, here's a fake news article, here's how to understand it, and this is how to not fall victim to it in the future. All right, so I'm going to switch over now, and we're going to look at the actual prompt itself. So here comes the transition. I hope you enjoyed that transition. So if you haven't already checked out the contents page of our Blackboard, please do so. I've posted a copy of what I'm looking at, which will also be the same place that you submit it when you do. It's 25% of your grade, so it's a big chunk. I also cannot pass you if you don't do all your major projects, so please do it. It's due in 28 days. Which means that from the filming of this video, you still have 27 days in which to complete a 4 to 6 page paper that only requires 2 external sources besides the one fake news story you've chosen. So I'm going to go through this. I'm going to read a little bit. I'm going to explain a little bit. This is the same thing I would have liked to have done in class with you all. The only difference is I would have preferred to ask a few questions. So if after the video you do have questions, I'm going to post on the discussion boards a new section for Project 1. Please, you can check that out to ask any quick questions to your classmates, and I'll be checking that as well, because if you have a question, chances are somebody else has a question as well. Do not hesitate to reach out. All right, cool. So here we go. So the first theme that I mentioned when we discussed in the syllabus video was fake news, false information, misleading information, and its effect on our society. The purpose of this project, as I said, is I want us to explore where fake news comes from, what its purposes are, and its effects on individuals and groups. So as you're reading these prompts, it's important to really pay attention to the language that I'm using and your professors are using, because I really do hope that in your research that you do explore, and not only in your research, but as in your writing as well, talk about where it comes from, who's producing it, what groups are producing it, maybe if you can find why they're doing it, what its purposes are, what its agenda is. Maybe there's something there beyond just trolls, and even what its potential effect on individuals and groups are. Because I mean, like for me, when I read this, I think of this hypothetical scenario, for instance. You have 10 people in a room. 5 people believe one set of facts because they read one news article. The other 5 people read a different news article that had the exact opposite information. What do those people do when they cannot agree on foundational truth? What happens to a society when truth isn't something that anybody can believe in, that everybody has their own version of the truth? How bad can that be? So this is what I want to be looking at as we're doing this project and for us to be talking about. Please choose a fake news story that you would like. If you are choosing it, as I said, please run it by me. If you want, you can choose one of the 4 below here, or as I put a little bit lower, any other ones that you find on snoops.com or PolitiFact. Our Black Lives Matters member poisoning food. Did AOC eat pets, say it's okay to eat pets? Did Joe Biden bury a dog on stage at a campaign rally? This one is my personal favorite. Did insect repellent companies hire a Ugandan man whose farts kill mosquitoes? Okay, so you can choose political, you can choose non-political. If you go the political route, I please ask of you to avoid using this paper as a means to get across some sort of political agenda or political ideology. Remember while researching and remember while writing what the purpose is. The purpose isn't to prove that this is false and what is correct. The purpose is to expose it as false and to try and explore why it's false and how it's false and what we can do to combat that. I don't want this to turn into a campaign rally for one side or the other side. Again, you can bring some stuff up, but avoid doing that. So, as we go through this news story, by this one, the one that you've chosen, and the information that you find about it, I want you to try and ask yourself a series of questions. So when I say ask, I also mean like ask and answer. That's how you'll be building out, a lot of writing on the page. To answer these questions, you will probably, and by probably, I mean you will need to do some more research beyond finding one source. If you can answer these 5 questions regarding fake news stories you've chosen, answer these 5 questions. You do not have to turn each question into a paragraph, because if you do, it would probably make for a slightly boring read. What I'm asking you to do instead is to try and combine your ideas and expand on these ideas. And do whatever you think is appropriate as a writer. So you might take question 3 and write about that for 2 or 3 paragraphs, whereas question 1 and 2 might be able to be put together. I'm saying that hypothetically. You don't necessarily have to do that, but if you don't consider this a 5-paragraph essay where you're just answering these questions in 5 paragraphs. We're going to talk about an outline next week, but for this week, I really want us to just focus our attention on getting ideas, researching, and picking and finalizing the story that we're going to be using. So, in a nutshell, and I'm going to have another video in a day or two talking about this stuff, which are the 5 questions, 5 media literacy questions that need to be asked, especially in the digital age. So who created the message? What website did you find it on? Who is the author? Can you find any information about that? If we were in class together and it was still up, I would have loved to have shown you a website titled martinlutherking.org. The website is no longer up, but if you went to it, you might assume, okay, this is where I can get great information to do a Martin Luther King project. But who created the message? It was neo-Nazis. It was an offshoot of the KKK. So, yeah, we probably shouldn't trust that website, and there is a reason it got shut down. What techniques are used to attract? Is there clever language? Is there imagery? Is there music? What are these people who are creating the message doing to convince their audience? Have they created a website that seems really logistic, like CNN.N.com? Which some people might get confused for the actual CNN.com. Help people understand the message differently, coming from different backgrounds. So what I'm asking you to do here is to start to think about how different people from different backgrounds might read that story and understand it. If we're trying to understand that fake news needs to be combated, that we need to learn lessons on how to view it, what does somebody who might be wearing a different pair of shoes do to help them get through this? So I'm asking you again to try and think about how other people might view it differently. For instance, you might see something and say, oh, that is clearly fake news. Whereas other people might be like, oh my gosh, that is super true. So what are they seeing? What's going on there? So thinking about different backgrounds. 4, what lifestyle, value, or point is being represented. So, we could think about this as, what are they trying to represent in this fake news story? Are they trying to make you seem like a good Republican or a good Democrat, a good Christian, a good atheist? Are they trying to make you believe that if you use a certain product, that you are going to be living a super healthy and supernatural life? But in reality, you probably won't be. Looking into what are they promising you, what is being represented. And 5thly, which for me is one of the more important reasons, why is the message being sent? What are they hoping to get out of it? I will be posting some information and a longer video discussing these 5 questions in later on this week. But again, I really wanted to use this time to go over a general overview of the project. Don't get too crazy with how we're answering these just yet. I'd really like for you to focus more on doing your research, looking at different articles, and finding out what you're going to use for this project. This part's really important. The purpose of this paper and research is to understand how information and misinformation surrounds us, and what we can do to not fall victim to it. As researchers, your goal should be to inform your readers about the general history, widespread nature of fake news. Not only that, but more importantly, you should also explain how to not fall victim to false information through analyzing your fake news story. Lastly, consider your final thoughts and think about what wisdom or lesson you would like to impart to your reader. For instance, what should they do now that they've read your piece? In a nutshell, this is going to be your thesis, an argument, a call to action to combating fake news. You've gone through this whole process, you've done this research. Now, what can somebody do to avoid this in the future? This is going to be 4 to 6 pages, as I mentioned earlier, and we are using MLA formatting. MLA dictates 3 specific aspects of your paper: the format of your paper, double spacing, size 12 font, a certain heading, how you put your title. All that information can be found here, and I would highly recommend for all your papers looking at this and using it as a checklist to ensure that you've used accurate MLA formatting. You're also going to be responsible for a works cited page for proper MLA formatting within the paper as well. And lastly, I'm asking that you please use a minimum of 2 sources on top of your fake news source. So for instance, if I chose number 4, which if I was doing this project, I would definitely be choosing this one. This doesn't count as your article or your sources. You would read this and then you would choose 2 more on top of that to start getting to write your paper successfully. So with that, what I would really like for you to accomplish through this week is to 1, pick your fake news story. 2, to learn what you can about your fake news story. By doing this, you are going to be preparing yourself for what I'm asking you to do next week, which is to start outlining and considering how your first draft is going to look. So we're going to transition again in 3, 2, 1. Hello again. Welcome back. So the last part of this video is I want to talk about what I'm expecting for you to try and accomplish this week. You might have heard this in English 111, but if you didn't, I'm going to remind you now. I'm also probably going to be talking about this multiple times throughout the semester. If not every week, then probably every other week, something along those lines. But writing is a process. What does that mean? Well, it means that writing is not done overnight. It's not done in an afternoon. It's not done in a 5-hour session, a few minutes, a 5-hour session, 5 hours before the paper is actually due. So to understand it as a process, we can start to break it down into steps. And if we follow step 1, step 2, step 3, writing the paper becomes a lot easier. So by the time you hit step 4 or 5, which is actually writing the paper, it's a lot easier. For those of you who've ever sat down at a computer and you look at that cursor and it's blinking and you don't know what to write, I've been there. It's writer's block. There's some ways that you can go about getting over that, and the best way, in my personal experience, through my own writing, as well as my research about writing, is to brainstorm and to think about your project. So week 1 of a research project, we'll call this, or I like to call it, the generating ideas portion of the project. During this week, The only writing I would expect you to do, which I am not even requiring, would be general journaling, what you're thinking, ideas that you've had, why you might choose this over that. Writing really helps you process what's going on up here. It takes all these sort of jumbled ideas that are shooting around, well, if it's anything like my brain, and it turns it into something that's more concrete that you can look at and organize and process, as opposed to just thinking about it. So that would be a great idea to write down some stuff, like a personal journal. But I'm not making it a requirement. What I am asking you to do as a requirement is to choose that article by choosing one of the 4 that I've asked you to choose, or doing your own research on Snopes.com or PolitiFact. So step 1, do some research to find an article that interests you. My recommendation wouldn't be to just pick one that has an interesting title off what I've sent you. It would be to choose 2 and look at both and make a comparison. It's a lot easier to make a decision about what you can do when you start to think about all the things you can do. So you might say, oh yeah, I'm going to answer question 1, or I'm going to use, fake news article number 1 on the prompt. And then a week or 2 goes by and you come to it and you're like, wait, oh, I don't actually like this, or wait, I don't think this is going to work. I don't think I'm going to be able to research this, whatever the reason, but you're putting yourself back. So this week, I want you to not only look at 1, I want you to hopefully not only even look at 2, but to look at a list of a minimum of 3 different fake news stories that have happened over the last 5, 10, 15 years that you might be able to choose. I'd like you to then not just say, okay, here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, but to actually read a little bit about 1 and read a little bit about 2 and read a little bit about 3. Make an educated decision about the article, about what you're choosing for this project. Don't just go to Snopes.com and choose the first thing you see. By generating these ideas, by thinking about what you're going to choose, is going to make it a lot easier for you to make a decision you're confident in. Has anybody ever done this? Because I know I have. You quickly pick something because you just want to pick something for the project, and you start doing your work, and then maybe a quarter, 50%, and in my case, sometimes even 75% into the project, you realize it's not going to work, it's not good, and you have to go all the way back to square one. Taking an extra hour this week to ensure that you've picked something you're confident in, something you know you'll be able to research, that's going to prevent that. So a little bit more time up front saves you so much time in the back end. Would you rather do an hour's worth of work this week, or would you rather do 3 or 4 hours worth of extra work in 2 to 3 weeks? So again, save yourself this time, save yourself this stress, and do this little research. So in generating ideas, I'm pretty much expecting you to try and do 2 things. The first one I mentioned, see what fake news articles you can find. You can do general Google searches for top fake news stories of the last decade, or most politicized or most viewed fake news stories of 2018, but something along those lines. That's one. Find few different articles. Then when you've narrowed your choices down to 2, 3, or 4 options, do a little bit of research on those articles. Are other people writing about that? Are other people talking about it? And generating ideas doesn't necessarily mean just reading. For instance, it could be something that really picked up steam, like another really interesting fake news story, something titled Pizzagate. Look that one up. But there's podcasts, there's videos on YouTube that you can start to generate ideas so that you're thinking about it. Once it's in your head and you're thinking about it, the gears are kind of going. And when you're taking a shower, like we have shower thoughts, or you're kind of sitting mindlessly on a bus, or you're like those waking moments before falling asleep where your brain's thinking about stuff, it's processing. So when you come into writing and outlining and thinking of what you need, it makes life so much easier for you. So 1, find a few stories for yourself and read them and judge which one you like better, which one you think is going to be easier. And then 2, when you've made that decision, start to look at some other secondary sources that you might use for your research. Again, this is the generating ideas portion of a research project. And unless your professor is giving you your exact research question, all your sources, and everything to do, this is a necessity, guaranteed part of doing all research, regardless of whether it's for your math class or for a sociology course or philosophy. Generating ideas is so vitally important in this process. It's number one. There's even a second round of generating ideas a little bit later on, but that's going to be step 3, and we'll get to step 3. So I hope this really helped a little bit. Again, in my next video, I'm going to be discussing those 5 media literacy questions, and hopefully that's going to help you even further through this project. But what will help you most in this project is actually getting into the work. For those of you who, after this video, might be a little confused, I get it, and I might be a little bit too. That's really common. But one of the ways to help yourself through that is to start actually plowing through it. Even if you don't fully grasp it, by working through it, you will probably start to get it a little bit. And again, if you can't get it, I'm going to be posting that on the discussion board section. I'm going to be posting a general question form for Project 1 that I'm going to be looking at daily, and that hopefully you and your classmates can participate in, and hopefully even help each other out. So thank you. Hopefully this helps, and good luck.